The crystal chandeliers glittered like frozen stars above the crowded ballroom, casting golden light across silk gowns and diamond necklaces. Laughter floated through the air light and sharp while the orchestra played a waltz that seemed to mock the fragile world beneath it. And then everything stopped. Lena Harper stood frozen in the center of the floor, her white silk gown now stained with a deep crimson splash of wine that spread across her bodice like fresh blood. The glass slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered at her feet. Gavin Drake's voice cut through the sudden silence, cold and clear, loud enough for every ear in the room to hear. I cannot, in good conscience, marry the daughter of a fraud. The words landed like a whip. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Fans snapped open. Whispers exploded like sparks. Henry Harper cheated his investors. Millions lost. The shipping contracts were forged. Lena's heart hammered so violently she could barely breathe. Her cheeks burned hotter than the spilled wine. She wanted to run to disappear into the shadows, but her legs refused to move. This was supposed to be her engagement ball. The night Gavin Drake, the man who had promised her a future, would make their betrothal official before all of London society. Instead, he had just destroyed her. You knew, she whispered, her voice cracking, barely audible even to herself. You knew my father was dying, and you still used him? Gavin's eyes were ice. Your father was a liar, Miss Harper, and now the whole world knows it. He turned away from her as if she were already nothing. The whispers grew louder, sharper, crueler. New money. Always the same. Poor girl. Ruined in one night. She'll never recover from this? Lena stood there alone, the red stain on her dress spreading wider with every shallow breath. Her father, Henry Harper, had passed away only 6 months ago. He had protected her until his last breath, hiding the truth about the failing shipping empire, so she could marry well and be safe. Now that protection had become her ruin. Everything was gone in a single moment. Her reputation, her fortune, her future. She felt the weight of every stare pressing down on her like stones. Some eyes held pity. Most held scorn. A few held satisfaction. And then, across the room, one pair of eyes was different. Reid Callahan, the Duke of Stormhaven, stood near the grand staircase. Tall, composed, dressed in perfect black evening attire, he watched the scene with a stillness that bordered on dangerous. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Something dark and troubled flickered behind his steel-gray eyes. He had met Henry Harper once years ago. A brief business matter. The man had shown him unexpected kindness when the young Duke had been arrogant and unreasonable. Reid had never forgotten it. Tonight, that memory burned. Lena lifted her chin, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. She would not cry here. Not in front of them. Not while Gavin Drake still watched her with that cold, victorious smile. But inside, her world had already shattered. Later that night, the Grand Harper townhouse stood dark and hollow. The servants had been dismissed weeks ago. Only silence greeted Lena as she stepped through the front door, still wearing the ruined white gown. She closed the heavy oak door behind her. The sound echoed through empty halls like a final judgment. In the dim light of a single candle, Lena walked slowly up the grand staircase to her bedroom. She stopped in front of the tall mirror. The red stain had dried into an ugly brown mark across her chest. She stared at her own reflection, and finally broke. A sob tore from her throat. She sank to her knees on the cold floor, pressing her forehead against the edge of the bed as hot tears streamed down her face. Everything her father had sacrificed for her, gone. The future she had quietly dreamed of, destroyed. The man she had trusted had betrayed her in the cruelest way possible. Yet even as the pain threatened to swallow her whole, something small and fierce stirred deep inside her chest. She wiped her tears with shaking hands and whispered into the empty room, I will not let this be the end of me. Lena Harper rose slowly to her feet, her eyes still wet but now burning with quiet determination. She had lost everything tonight, but she had not lost herself. And somewhere in the shadows of London, the Duke of Stormhaven could not stop thinking about the girl in the ruined white dress, and the debt of kindness he still owed her father. This story is about how the truth can break a person, but only courage in facing that truth can truly set them free. The weeks that followed the ball felt like walking through fog. London society had closed its doors to Lena Harper with ruthless finality. Invitations stopped arriving. Old acquaintances crossed the street to avoid her. Even the servants who once smiled at her now looked away in shame or fear. With what little money remained, Lena moved to a modest cottage on the quiet edge of Richmond. The house was small, the garden overgrown, but it was hers. No more grand townhouse, no more silk gowns, only plain wool dresses and the heavy weight of survival. She took a position as governess to the two young daughters of a respectable middle-class merchant family. The work was simple, teaching French piano and proper manners, but every evening when the lessons ended, Lena would sit by the small fireplace and feel the silence press against her chest. One rainy afternoon, while walking back from the market, she nearly collided with an older woman carrying a basket of bread. "Miss Lena," the woman whispered, eyes widening in recognition. Lena froze. "I'm sorry I waited so long." Lena stood there in the rainwater, mixing with the tears she could no longer hold back. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Gavin had said at the ball. A few days later, a letter arrived offering her a temporary summer position governess to a young lady at Stormhaven Estate. The pay was generous. The family name was not mentioned. Desperate and exhausted, Lena accepted. When the carriage rolled through the grand iron gates of Stormhaven, Lena's heart clenched with fear. She kept her head down, introducing herself simply as Miss Harper, and praying no one would connect her to the scandal that had shaken London only weeks earlier. The young lady she was to teach was Reid Callahan, bright-eyed 17 years old and impossibly lively. Ava's laughter filled the sunlit morning room the very first day. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Miss Harper Ava teased gently. "Don't worry. My brother barely notices anyone these days. He's always buried in papers or riding across the estate." Reid Callahan, the Duke of Stormhaven, remained mostly invisible that first week. Lena caught only glimpses of him, tall figure, striding across the lawn at dawn, or the sound of his deep voice giving orders to the steward. She learned from the servants that he had lost his wife 3 years ago in childbirth. Since then, the light had gone out of him. He carried his duty like armor. Yet one evening, while Lena sat reading with Ava in the library, Dr. Elias Thorne Reed's closest friend and the estate physician stopped by with a basket of fresh herbs. "You carry yourself like someone holding her breath." "Miss Harper," he said quietly when Ava left the room for a moment. His eyes were kind observant. "Old wounds don't heal if you keep them hidden in the dark." Lena looked away, fingers tightening around her book. She wanted to tell him everything. Instead, she only whispered, "Some truths are safer left buried." The days passed in a fragile rhythm. Ava's cheerful energy slowly coaxed small smiles from Lena. They walked through the rose gardens, practiced watercolor, and shared silly stories that made Lena laugh despite herself. For the first time in months, the heavy stone in her chest felt a little lighter. But the shadows followed. Whispers began reaching the estate, the new rumors spread by Gavin Drake. That Lena had known about her father's crimes. That she had tried to trap him into marriage for his money. That she was dangerous. Each new rumor made Lena retreat further into herself. She avoided the main halls when guests visited. She ate alone in her small room. At night, she lay awake replaying every moment she had trusted Gavin, every tender word he had spoken, and felt the shame burn hotter. One stormy afternoon, while sorting old books in the library attic for Ava's lessons, Lena found a small wooden box hidden behind a stack of dusty ledgers. Inside were yellowed letters tied with faded ribbon. Her hands shook as she opened one. It was from her father to Gavin Drake, dated only weeks before his death. In Henry Harper's familiar handwriting, he begged for more time, explained his failing health, offered every remaining asset, and received in return a cold reply from Gavin confirming the transfer of ownership. The final line cut deepest. You will never see a penny more. Consider your daughter's future my final gift. Her silence in exchange for your ruin. Lena's breath caught in a silent sob. She pressed the letter to her chest as rage and grief crashed over her in waves. He had planned it all. Every sweet promise. Every gentle touch. Every future he painted for her. All of it had been a trap. She wanted to scream. She wanted to burn the letter in the fireplace and ride straight to London to confront him. Instead, she folded the papers carefully, placed them back in the box, and hid it once more. No one could know. Not Ava, whose laughter had become precious to her. Not Dr. Thorne, who offered gentle wisdom. And especially not Reid Callahan, the man whose quiet strength had begun to feel like safety. If the truth came out now, it would destroy the only place she had found even a sliver of peace. So Lena wiped her tears, smoothed her dress, and descended the stairs with a calm face that hid the storm raging inside her heart. But deep down, she knew the silence she chose tonight would not last forever. The summer days at Stormhaven settled into a quiet rhythm that felt almost like healing. Lena found herself lingering longer in the library after Ava's lessons. At first, it was only to return books. Then it became conversations that stretched past sunset. Reid Callahan would appear in the doorway. Some evenings, coat unbuttoned sleeves rolled to his elbows, carrying the faint scent of leather and rain-soaked fields. He never stayed long at first. A polite question about Ava's progress. A brief nod. But one night, when thunder rumbled in the distance, he remained. You speak of loss with such understanding, Miss Harper, he said quietly, standing near the fireplace. Most people offer empty comfort. You seem to know the weight of it. Lena's fingers tightened around the edge of the book in her lap. She thought of her father's last days, of the lies Gavin had fed her, of the white dress stained red. Her voice came soft, almost hesitant. When you lose someone who was your whole world, the silence afterward changes you. You learn to carry their absence like another heartbeat. Reid looked at her, then really looked, and something shifted in his steel-gray eyes. For the first time, Lena saw the man beneath the Duke. The one who still woke at night, reaching for a wife who was no longer there. The one who bore the weight of Stormhaven and his young sister alone. Ava and Mrs. Eleanor Grant seemed to sense the fragile thread growing between them. Ava would suddenly remember she had forgotten her shawl during garden walks, leaving Lena and Reid to continue alone among the blooming roses. Mrs. Grant began setting 2 extra cups of tea in the morning room whenever Reid returned early from his rides. Little by little, the conversations deepened. They spoke of responsibility that felt heavier than duty, of the fear that one wrong choice could destroy everything you tried to protect. Reid's voice would grow rough when he mentioned his late wife, the child they lost, the guilt that still haunted his quiet hours. Lena listened without judgment, offering only gentle presence, the kind she herself had longed for in the months after her father's death. Yet the shadows outside Stormhaven were growing darker. One warm afternoon, Lord Clayton Reid arrived for a visit. His usual easy smile strained. He pulled Reid aside in the study, but their voices carried faintly through the open window, where Lena sat reading with Ava. Gavin Drake is preparing a lawsuit, Lord Clayton said gravely. He means to claim the last remnants of the Harper shipping assets. Worse, he's circulating documents suggesting the daughter knew everything and helped conceal the fraud. Ava's hand found Lena's under the table, squeezing tightly. Lena felt the ground tilt beneath her. She excused herself quickly, heart pounding, and walked until she reached the edge of the lake. The water shimmered peacefully, but inside her chest a storm raged. She could not stay. If Gavin dragged her name through the courts again, the scandal would touch Reid and Ava. They had given her shelter kindness a chance to breathe again. She would not repay them with ruin. That night, a violent rainstorm lashed against the windows of Stormhaven. Lightning split the sky as Lena stood in the corridor, hesitating outside Reid's study. Her hand trembled as she finally knocked. Reid opened the door, surprise flickering across his face, when he saw her soaked shawl and pale cheeks. "Miss Harper? Is something wrong?" She stepped inside the door, closing behind her, with a soft click that felt final. Rain hammered the glass like urgent fingers. For a long moment she could not speak. Then the words came halting and raw. "I am not who you think I am. Entirely. My father. There are things about his business I only recently learned. Terrible things. And the man responsible? He is coming for what little I have left. I fear if I remain here, he will come for you and Ava as well." Reid crossed the room slowly, until he stood only steps away. The firelight caught the silver threads in his dark hair, and the quiet intensity in his eyes. "You think I would turn you away because of another man's lies?" His voice was low, steady, but beneath it lay something deeper. "I have spent 3 years drowning in my own regrets, Miss Harper. Watching my wife slip away while I stood helpless. Carrying the fear that I failed her. That I fail everyone I try to protect." He reached out, hesitating, then gently brushed a damp strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was feather light, yet it sent warmth spreading through Lena's frozen heart. "I see you," he continued softly. "Not the scandal, not the rumors. I see a woman who carries pain with grace, who listens when others speak of loss, because she knows it too well." Lena's breath caught. For one fragile moment, the space between them felt electric, filled with unspoken longing and the terrifying possibility of hope. She could almost imagine leaning into his warmth, letting his strength hold her up. But fear surged stronger. If he knew the full truth, the letters, the depth of Gavin's betrayal, how close she had come to marrying the man who destroyed her father, everything would shatter. This tender thing growing between them would be poisoned. She stepped back even as her heart protested. "Thank you for seeing me," she whispered. "But some secrets are too heavy to share." "Not yet." Reid's hand fell to his side. He did not press her, yet the look in his eyes told her he felt the same pull and the same fear. The next morning, Lena stood at her bedroom window, watching the storm clouds slowly drift away. Her decision had crystallized during the long, sleepless night. She could not hide behind Reid's protection forever. Gavin Drake had taken enough from her father, her future, her trust. She would not let him take the fragile safety she had found at Stormhaven. Lena lifted her chin, resolve settling over her like armor. She would face Gavin herself. Alone. And whatever the cost, she would protect the people who had begun to feel like home. The decision burned inside Lena like a quiet flame that would not be extinguished. She left Stormhaven before dawn, telling only Mrs. Eleanor Grant that she had urgent business in London. The old housekeeper pressed the small packet of letters into her hands, one last time, eyes heavy with worry. "Be careful, child," she whispered. "That man has no heart left to reach." The carriage journey felt endless. Lena sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, the faded letters resting against her chest like a shield and a wound at the same time. Every mile closer to the city tightened the knot of fear in her stomach. She remembered the spilled wine, the cruel laughter, the way Gavin had turned away from her as if she were already dead to him. By the time she reached the old Harper shipping offices near the docks, her palms were damp and her heart raced. The building looked smaller than she remembered, faded paint, dusty windows, a shadow of its former glory. Gavin Drake was waiting in what had once been her father's private study. He leaned back in the leather chair, elegant and smug as though he had expected her. Well, well, the little governess returns. His smile was sharp amused. Come to beg, Lena. She did not sit. She placed the packet of letters on the desk between them with steady hands, though inside she trembled. I want you to withdraw every accusation. Stop the rumors. Leave Stormhaven and the Callahans out of this. In return, I will not fight you publicly. Gavin laughed a low, mocking sound that echoed off the walls. You still don't understand, do you? He picked up one of the letters, glanced at it, then tossed it aside. Your father was weak. I didn't just adjust the books. I made sure he stayed quiet. A few well-placed words to the right physicians, a little pressure when he was already dying, and he stopped fighting. All so I could take what should have been mine. Lena felt the room tilt. The air grew thick. She gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself as the full weight of his confession sank in. You hastened his death. Gavin shrugged, completely unrepentant. Business is business. And now I'm finishing what I started. I'm filing suit next week for the remaining Harper assets. By the time I'm done, your name will be so blackened that even the Duke of Stormhaven will regret ever letting you through his doors. His eyes gleamed with cruel satisfaction. Unless, of course, you want to protect your precious Duke and his sweet little sister. I have new documents, ready letters, witness statements, all suggesting you knew everything and helped cover it up. How do you think society will react when they learn the Duke has been sheltering a willing accomplice? The threat landed like ice water down her spine. Lena saw it clearly then. If she fought him openly, the scandal would swallow Reid and Ava whole. They had given her safety laughter and the first real kindness she had known in years. She could not repay them with destruction. Her hands shook as she reached for the papers. Gavin slid across the desk, legal documents prepared in advance, as if he had known she would come. With a steadying breath, she picked up the pen. For a long moment, she stared at the blank space where her signature would seal her fate. Memories flashed her father's gentle smile, the white dress ruined with wine, Reid's quiet voice in the firelight, Ava's bright laughter in the garden. Tears blurred her vision, but she did not let them fall. She signed. Every right to the remaining Harper assets. Every claim. Every piece of her father's legacy. Gone. Gavin watched with cold triumph. Wise choice. The lawsuit will be withdrawn by morning, and I suggest you stay far away from Stormhaven. People like you always bring trouble. Lena rose without another word. She walked out of the office with her head high, even as her legs threatened to give way beneath her. The return journey to Stormhaven passed in a haze of exhaustion and grief. When the carriage finally rolled through the familiar gates, the sun was setting. Lena stepped down, every muscle aching, her spirit hollowed out. Reid was waiting near the entrance. One look at her pale face and shadowed eyes, and his expression darkened with concern. Lena? He rarely used her first name. The sound of it nearly undid her. What happened? You disappeared without a word. She managed a small, weary smile that did not reach her eyes. It's over, she said softly. The accusations, the threats, they're finished. You and Ava are safe. Reid stepped closer, searching her face. He could sense the depth of what she was not saying. His hand lifted as if to touch her, then fell back to his side. You look like you've been through hell, he murmured. Let me help you. Lena shook her head, throat tight. Some burdens are meant to be carried alone. Please, just let me rest. Dr. Elias Thorne appeared in the hallway later that evening. He said little, but his quiet observation missed nothing. He left a mild sleeping draft with Mrs. Eleanor Grant, worry etched in the lines around his eyes. Ava, too, sensed the change. She hovered near Lena's door, but when Mrs. Eleanor Grant gently pulled her aside, the young girl overheard fragments enough to understand that Lena had paid a terrible price to protect them. That night, a soft drizzle began to fall over the gardens of Stormhaven. Lena slipped outside alone, wrapped in a simple shawl. She walked until she reached the rose arbor, where she and Reid had once spoken of loss. Rain misted her face, cool and gentle, mingling with the tears she could no longer hold back. She had lost everything a second time. Her father's legacy, her last claim to justice, the fragile hope of a future untainted by the past. Yet, as the rain soaked through her shawl and ran down her cheeks, a strange, quiet clarity settled over her heart. This time, she had chosen the loss herself, not out of fear, but out of love. And somehow, in the middle of the breaking storm, that truth felt like the first small step towards something she had never dared to name. Spring arrived at Stormhaven like a gentle promise. Reid Callahan had not been idle in the weeks after Lena's silent return. With the quiet help of Lord Clayton Reed's connections and Dr. Elias Thorne's careful discretion, he began to dig deeper into the shadows surrounding Gavin Drake. Late into the nights, while the rest of the house slept, Reid pored over old ledgers and spoke with former clerks who had once worked for Harper Shipping. Mrs. Eleanor Grant finally brought forward the hidden account books she had guarded for years, the true records that proved years of deliberate manipulation. Piece by piece, the full truth emerged. Gavin had not only stolen the company, he had isolated Henry Harper, pressured his physicians, and ensured the dying man could never speak against him. The evidence was undeniable. Reid stood in his study one quiet morning, the weight of the documents heavy in his hands. He thought of Lena's exhausted face, the night she returned from London, of the way she had tried to carry everything alone. Something fierce and protective stirred deep inside him. He would not let her face this darkness by herself any longer. The grand spring ball in London became the stage where everything would change. The ballroom glowed with hundreds of candles and overflowing flower arrangements. Society's elite filled the room, their whispers already buzzing about the latest rumors. Lena entered on Reid's arm, her simple ivory gown elegant and unadorned. She felt every eye upon her, but this time she did not shrink. Reid's voice was calm yet commanding as he addressed the gathered crowd from the top of the staircase. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight, I stand before you, not only as the Duke of Stormhaven, but as a man who refuses to let lies destroy an innocent life. He spoke clearly and without hesitation, laying out the truth. The forged documents, the manipulated accounts, the cruel pressure placed on a dying man. With every word, the room grew quieter until only the crackle of candle flames could be heard. Gavin Drake stood near the back, his face draining of color, as Reid presented the real ledgers and sworn statements from witnesses. When the final piece of evidence was revealed, proof that Gavin had deliberately hastened Henry Harper's silence, gasps rippled through the crowd. The scandal that had once crushed Lena now turned with crushing force against the man who created it. Gavin tried to speak to deny, but his voice was lost beneath the rising wave of outrage. By the end of the evening, his reputation lay in ruins. Formal charges would follow. Doors that had once opened for him would now remain firmly closed. Lena stood beside Reid through it all, her hand resting lightly on his arm. When the room turned to her, she lifted her chin and spoke with quiet strength. I once believed the truth would only bring more pain. She said, her voice steady, though her eyes shimmered. But I have learned that hiding from it only gives it greater power. The truth can destroy us, but only courage in facing that truth can truly set us free. Her gaze found Reid's. In that moment, the gratitude and tenderness between them needed no words. I owe my healing to the Duke of Stormhaven. She continued softly, and to the kindness that reminded me I was never truly alone. A few weeks later, under the soft light of a spring morning at Stormhaven, Lena and Reid were married in a simple ceremony in the Rose Garden. No grand spectacle. Only those who truly mattered stood witness Ava with tears of joy in her eyes. Vivian Callahan watching with quiet approval. Mrs. Eleanor Grant beaming as if Lena were her own daughter. Dr. Elias Thorne and Lord Clayton Reed stood nearby, exchanging knowing glances as Reed and Lena shared their first dance as husband and wife, beneath strings of soft lanterns. Later that evening, as the stars began to appear, Lena and Reed slipped away to the wide balcony overlooking the gardens. The air was sweet with blooming flowers. Reed's arm rested gently around her waist. Lena leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in the peace she had once thought impossible. "I used to believe that losing everything was the end," she whispered. "But it wasn't. It was only the beginning." Reed turned her gently to face him. His hand cupped her cheek with the same reverent tenderness he had shown that stormy night in his study. "You taught me that love is not about protecting someone from pain," he said softly, "but about walking through it together. You healed parts of me I thought would remain broken forever." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the garden glow under the moonlight. Somewhere in the distance, Ava's laughter floated on the breeze, mixing with Mrs. Eleanor Grant's warm voice. In that quiet moment, the wounds of the past no longer defined them. They had faced the storm. They had chosen courage. And in doing so, they had opened the door to a love deep enough to heal them both, and to a future written not by betrayal, but by truth and forgiveness. This story reminds us that the bravest thing we can ever do is face our deepest truths, because only then can we truly begin to live and truly learn to love. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for riding with us today. Aviso legal, barra disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully only to support production while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.